his troops into Ukraine. A full-scale Russian invasion began in the early hours of the morning, rockets striking military targets in several towns and cities, prompting thousands of Ukrainians to flee.
This is a grave moment for the security of Europe. This is a deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion.
With tanks and troops on the move, the West pledges tougher sanctions on Russia as the Prime Minister condemns its president.
Putin was always determined to attack his neighbour, no matter what we did. Now we see him for what he is, a blood-stained aggressor who believes in imperial conquest.
Ukraine's worst fears are realised, with civilian targets hit and the certainty of more suffering to come. Tonight, as Putin threatens severe consequences for anyone who dares oppose him, we ask where it all might end.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale.
Good evening. Russian combat troops are tonight advancing on Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, after launching an invasion which world leaders said had brought war back to Europe. The attack started before dawn with airstrikes and artillery bombardments before soldiers moved in with tanks. The UK's Ministry of Defence says there are heavy casualties on both sides. The Chernobyl nuclear power station appears to have been seized. Boris Johnson condemned the invasion, calling President Putin a blood-stained aggressor. He said Ukraine had the unwavering support of the UK and announced further sanctions to, as he put it, squeeze Russia from the global economy. Well, this is the scene tonight in Kyiv. Ukrainian authorities say Russian paratroopers are now on the outskirts of the city. From there, our Europe editor James Mates reports on the return of dark days to Europe.
US intelligence had warned Putin was planning exactly this, but how many really believed it? That a full-scale armoured and air assault against a European country was remotely possible. The early hours of this morning and the ugly clatter of Russian helicopter gunships swept away any such illusions. A military airbase just 20 miles or so from the capital, Kyiv, under assault by airborne troops. In the skies above the city, 2 Ukrainian fighter jets raced towards the battle. There are few details of the fighting. At least one Russian helicopter is known to have been shot down. And at mid-afternoon today, Russian airborne troops were filmed apparently in control of the airbase.
They are Russian airborne forces.
Now confirmed by the Ukrainian government. It may be a dangerous bridgehead for an assault on central Kyiv. Russian attacks have stretched west almost to the Polish border. An airbase near Lviv hit by this cruise missile. Among more than 100 missiles launched last night, a precision strike appears to have taken out a radar station near the Black Sea coast in the south of the country. On 3 main axes from the north, the northeast and the south, here from Crimea, armoured vehicles and their support convoys were filmed driving through border posts, all marked with a white-painted Z for recognition. Invincible as these columns may first appear, it's clear the Ukrainian defenders have had at least some success. Pictures of shattered armour appearing throughout today. Ukraine's president spoke to his nation this evening.
What we're hearing today, it's the sound of a new Iron Curtain descending, cutting Russia off from the civilized world. It is our task as a nation to make sure that this Iron Curtain doesn't pass through our Ukrainian territory.
This afternoon, Putin was addressing an assembled gathering of the wealthiest oligarchs in Russia, men likely to soon feel the full force of sanctions. Last night, as he announced the attack, he he had thought nothing of hinting at nuclear war.
Whoever tries to interfere with us, and even more so to create threats for our country, for our people, should know that Russia's response will be immediate and will lead you to such consequences that you have never encountered in your history.
As he spoke, the UN Security Council had been in session. The Ukrainian ambassador didn't mince words to his Russian counterpart.
There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, Ambassador.
Across Europe, leaders had been woken to hear that once again, war has been unleashed on their continent.
Ukraine is a country that for decades has enjoyed freedom and democracy and the right to choose its own destiny. We and the world cannot allow that freedom just to be snuffed out.
NATO is meeting in special session. Even non-members, Sweden and Finland, are to attend. More than 100 aircraft are on high alert.
This is a grave moment for the security of Europe. This is a deliberate, cold-blooded and long-planned invasion.
On Ukraine's western borders, thousands are already queuing to leave the country. The horrors of war are frequently followed by a refugee crisis. This may be no exception. And if that wasn't enough bad news for one day, the Ukrainians are saying tonight that the Chernobyl nuclear power plant has, after a fight, been overrun by Russian troops. Its condition and that of the nuclear waste stored there are unknown. James Mates, ITV News, Kyiv.
On the ground, the exact picture of what's going on in Ukraine is still pretty unclear, but here is what we do know. The invasion started in the early hours of the morning with Russian forces unleashing a massive attack using airstrikes, artillery, sea-launched missiles and ground forces. Before dawn, missile strikes and shelling could be heard in several cities, including Kyiv, Dnipro, Kharkiv and Odessa. As day broke, Russian military vehicles were seen entering Ukraine at multiple points along the border, including from Russian-held Crimea, and also from Belarus to the north, which actively supports Russia. Airports and air bases have also been targeted, prompting Ukrainian airspace to be closed. And Russian forces appear to have seized, as James said, the Chernobyl nuclear plant, site of the world's worst nuclear disaster. Our correspondent Dan Rivers is in the city of Dnipro in eastern Ukraine, which was one of those hit by airstrikes as the invasion started. Dan.
Well, tonight there does seem to have been a lull in the fighting after a day that has left many here in eastern Ukraine in shock at the sheer pace of this invasion. People here are now braced for another night, potentially, of bloodshed and fear.
It was an apocalyptic start to a day no one in Ukraine will ever forget or forgive. This was Dnipro before first light, an ammunition dump hit by a Russian airstrike. The sunrise revealing a country under attack from its neighbour. The bombardment was vicious and unrelenting. Some came so close to death it was scarcely believable. This living room in Kharkiv was lanced by a missile that somehow didn't detonate. In the city's main square, they were praying for more miracles. Some, though, were not spared. President Putin claims these were precision strikes. If so, it appears Ukraine's people are his enemy. We drove across a large swathe of the east of the country today as the missiles fell, taking out military targets, but there were plenty of shells falling on civilians too. Russia's Grad missile system is well known from 8 years of war here, and it's feared with good reason. The scramble for cash, a sign of the rising alarm. The queue for fuel, a sign of the growing shortages. How are you feeling?
Shaking, but I don't know. Oh, when you start to ask me, I start to worry. I don't have place to go, so I will stay home and wait what will be.
The Russian forces moving north from Crimea appear to be making rapid progress following the Dnieper River. But at some point, they're going to arrive here, a city of more than 1 million people.
The Russians may still be a few hundred miles downstream from Dnipro, but people here are making the most of these last hours together. Outside the city's main administrative building, soldiers eye everyone nervously. But these men are signing up to defend their country.
This isn't just a war between Ukraine and Russia, but between Russia, Europe and the rest of the world.
Dnipro is strategically critical, straddling the river which bisects this country. If the Russians want all of Ukraine, they'll have to take this city eventually. Dan Rivers, ITV News, Dnipro.
News of the invasion was met with panic by many residents in Kyiv. Some tried to flee, causing large traffic jams out of the city and long queues at train stations. Others, though, are determined to stay and protect themselves however they can, as our global security editor Rohit Katru reports.
By 5 a.m, the attack on the capital was underway. The warnings they'd been told to ignore were right after all. Sunrise and sirens. The Russian military were getting closer. Neighbours became friends. Here they turned an art gallery into a makeshift bunker.
Everybody is scared, but we try to keep calm.
Yeah, you can hear it now. The missiles sent to demolish buildings had emboldened people.
We are angry. We are angry.
We are very angry.
Yes.
I'm very angry.
But we have.
I'm not scared. I'm angry.
Then came the jets. Ukrainian armoured vehicles. Suddenly people realised their neighbourhood was now a war zone. Time to collect what money they could.
So scary, very scary. I'm sorry. Sorry.
And leave. At the train station, a long line of lives torn apart. Unexpected journeys begin. Uncertainty is ahead. They have wiped the arrivals board here. There is no need for it because the traffic is all going in one direction. Everyone here is just trying to get out of the city. Then there are those who stayed behind in the unchanging city to face a fate which has yet to be imposed. Rohit Katru, ITV News, Kyiv.
And our correspondent Neil Connery is in Moscow tonight. Neil, what's the reaction been in Russia to their president's invasion?
Mary, State TV is the main source of news for many Russians, and what's been fascinating today is that they've been concentrating on their coverage in the Donbass, where those two self-proclaimed republics are. So their viewers are not getting the enormity of the whole picture across Ukraine. Now, Russians I've been speaking to today have been speaking to me about their fear, their anxiety about what all of this would mean, the effect of sanctions on them. Others supporting what President Putin is doing here. We've had protests in Moscow tonight as well, St. Petersburg, and a number of other Russian cities. These are anti-war protests that have been going on. But, you know, ultimately, it's not what the Russian people think or feel that is going to change anything here. It's what happens to those around President Putin in the elite. What is the effect of sanctions and the response of the West on them?
OK, Neil Connery in Moscow. Thank you. More still to come on ITV Evening News. We will have the details of the sanctions planned by the government here. And we will be back live in Kyiv, a city braced for conflict. Plus, we will be hearing from President Biden in Washington, and that is all after the break, so do stay with us. Welcome back. The Prime Minister pledged today to impose the largest and most severe set of economic sanctions Russia has ever seen. Major Russian banks will have their assets frozen in the UK. Exports of high-tech goods to Russia will be stopped, and the airline Aeroflot will be banned from landing here. Here's our political editor Robert Peston on the UK's response.
Sanctions now! Sanctions now! Sanctions now!
Distressed Ukrainians in Britain opposite Downing Street urging the Prime Minister to financially punish Putin and Russia for the invasion. And in a meeting of the Emergency Cobra Committee at 7:30 this morning, that was on the mind of senior ministers, as the Prime Minister made clear at noon.
Today, in concert with our allies, we will agree a massive package of economic sanctions designed in time to hobble the Russian economy.
And shortly after that, the Russian ambassador drove to see the Foreign Secretary for a dressing down. And then
Putin will stand condemned in the eyes of the world and of history. He will never be able to cleanse the blood of Ukraine from his hands. Now we see him for what he is, a blood-stained aggressor who believes in imperial conquest.
So he said he'd punish him economically. The Prime Minister's new 10-point package of sanctions includes a freeze on the assets of 100 super-rich oligarchs and military businesses, a freeze on the assets of more banks, including the second biggest VTB, a ban on the sale to Russia of high-tech equipment and kit useful to their oil and gas industry, a ban on the sale of dual-use equipment that could have military uses, a prohibition on Aeroflot flying here, and measures to make it harder for companies in the Russian state to raise money in the UK. Not a moment for political point scoring.
We must urgently reinforce and reassure our NATO allies in Eastern Europe, who now stand at the frontier of Putin's aggression.
A former Prime Minister wants Putin punished so that
Russia feels absolutely the cold wind of isolation, and the Russian people understand that Vladimir Putin has brought their state to a pariah state.
May I ask him, however, to look wider than simply the Russian people and to look at all those who are enabling Putin's economy and to update the Treason Act so that we can identify them and call them what they are, traitors.
a sombre day-long vigil for their families and perhaps for democracy. Robert Peston, ITV News.
OK, so that's what's going on here. But in the US, President Biden is speaking right now, and our correspondent Emma Murphy is in Washington. So, Emma, what's he been saying?
Well, President Biden is addressing the nation at this moment. He's basically accusing Russia of being the aggressor in this situation and laying out exactly the sanctions that he's going to take. He is very clear that the only one at fault in this situation is President Putin. This is what he said in the last few moments.
We've been transparent with the world. We've shared declassified evidence about Russia's plans and cyber attacks and false pretexts so that there could be no confusion or cover-up about what Putin was doing. Putin is the aggressor. Putin chose this war, and now he and his country will bear the consequences.
And he's just announced that some of the assets that are held by some of Russia's biggest banks will be completely frozen here in the US. He's basically weaponizing the dollar. There will be an impact here, there will be an impact elsewhere in the West, but there is a feeling that if something isn't done now, we will pay a much higher cost further down the road.
OK, Emma Murphy in Washington, thank you. And Emma alluded to the wider impact of the invasion, and it is already affecting the world economy. Oil prices have hit another record high. Moscow is the second biggest exporter of crude oil and also the world's largest exporter of natural gas. And there are concerns that sanctions could further drive up prices. The RAC estimates that unleaded petrol could hit £1.55 a litre. Just away from the invasion for a moment. There is now no legal requirement for people who test positive for COVID in England to isolate. All coronavirus laws in England have now officially ended. But those who do test positive will still be advised to stay at home. And the Queen has postponed 2 more virtual audiences after catching COVID. Buckingham Palace says the Queen will continue with light duties with no other engagement scheduled for this week. Let's return now to our main story, Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Now, combat troops are advancing on the capital, Kyiv, where our Europe editor James Mates is tonight. James, what's happening there? How are things developing?
It's quiet here in Kyiv tonight, perhaps ominously quiet. What's not been clear today is exactly how far the Russians have been able and how fast they've been able to push onto Ukrainian territory, how much they've been slowed by Ukrainian resistance and how much more they may put into it in the days ahead. For example, we've seen no amphibious landing on the south coast from the Black Sea, and we do know that they have the capability to do that. Perhaps most worrying for the government here is that battle at that airfield that featured in my report earlier. That we understand is still going on. If they manage to secure that airfield, it is quite likely that they will be able to bring in sufficient troops to launch an attack on the capital, and that would potentially be a mortal threat if to the government here if they're able to, as they put it, decapitate the government.
OK, James, chilling indeed in Kyiv. Thank you very much for that. And that is it from me. You can follow all the latest developments in Ukraine on our website. And in half an hour, here on ITV, we've got a special Tonight programme, War in Europe, analysing today's events and looking at how it might impact us all. Then, of course, Tom will be here for News at 10. But from me and all the evening news team here and in Ukraine, goodbye.